5:33. We're 3 minutes past. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and we've got an executive session. I will entertain a motion for an executive session.
Mayor, I'll move that we move into executive session pursuant to CRS State Statute 24-6-402, parentheses 4, parentheses F, for personnel matters, screen city clerk applications.
Thank you. Before we do that, I got a little behind here. Why don't we go ahead and have the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll have the roll call, or not yet?
No, just regular meetings when we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Just a roll.
Okay, just a roll call? Let's have a roll call then. Let me get this menu going here.
John's here. Oh, there.
Start voting, please.
Well, I didn't see you.
We have 5. I need one more, please.
Pictures one. I did.
And we are, Sharon?
We have a quorum.
Okay. Councilor Gillespie will be a little late. He called, so he should be here. And with that, we'll move into executive session. Thank you. The March 18th meeting of your Alamosa City Council. Would you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next up is agenda approval. Do we have any additions, questions, or concerns about the agenda? Sharon?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
If not, Mayor, I'll make the motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, start voting, please. Sharon?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Next up, we have citizen comment. We have a few. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes since we have so many. We have about 7 or 8 here. We will start with Brian Stark. Would you please approach the podium and give us your name and address, please, sir?
Brian Stark, 212 San Juan. I just had a few things that I'd like to bring up about the new rec center multi-use facility. Hopefully we can get that going. And it was a hard year this year due to the fact that we had no ice. We had 3 weeks ice this year. The hockey team really struggled hard. But we did good. We took 3rd in state, so that's kind of outstanding. And another thing I'd like to bring up is a multi-unit could be used for a lot of things. I have a daughter that's, for the last 3 years, has been driving to Pueblo to do roller derby. And if we get this multi-thing going, we could have our own roller derby team right here. But that's really kind of all I got to say. I didn't want to be first to talk about this either. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Next up is Hannah Castillo. Thank you for being here, Hannah. Please give us your name and your address, please.
Hannah Castillo and 90 Faculty Drive. Hello, my name is Hannah, and I am almost 12 years old, and I play left wing and goalie for the two teams. We played Denver, Taos, Netherlands, Durango, and Durango. I thought about playing for Taos's team for more ice time, but we couldn't drive there 3 times a week. Our Pee Wee team got to play in the Pepsi Center in Denver, but we didn't care if we won or lost. But if we won, it would be better if we won. I hope we get a new ice rink to hopefully beat some teams.
Thank you, Hannah. Next up is Maxwell Stark. Please approach the podium. Give us your name again and address for the record, please.
My name is Max Stark, 212 San Juan. I just had a few things to say as well. I am speaking before you this evening to explain why it would be a good idea to install a multi-use facility in Alamosa. First off, I would like to say that our season of hockey is more than average length for high school hockey, and it has been a good one. However, we have not had very much ice time at all, and when we do have ice time, it is usually in Taos or Creed, and that, as you well know, is a longer drive than if we just had an ice rink for more than 3 weeks here in Alamosa. However, if we had a facility that has cooling tubes, a roof, and 2 enclosed sides, I think that we would get a lot more practice in, and we would be a much better team. When I go to college, I would like to get a scholarship for hockey and eventually become a pro. However, as you all well know, without practice, nobody can be proficient at any sport. Also, during the summer, the county could have inline hockey teams as well as another tennis court. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxwell. Next up is Henry White. Thank you for being here, Henry. What's your name and your address for the record, please?
Henry White of 220 Mill Run, Mosca, and I'm here to talk about the multi-use facility as well. I am on the high school hockey team. As stated before, our season was fairly long. We were trying to go from early November to just this past weekend, but the problem is we only had 3 weeks of ice time here. And I really enjoy the sport, and I think when this program was started, that was the intention, was for to introduce kids to hockey and introduce them to the sport and sort of build that interest. I remember in my first year when I was this high, going out and just sitting in the cold while my mom tied my skates, having a fun little practice. And then in a few years, we got the warming hut, and that was really nice. I was able to take things more seriously. I was able to go to more practices when I could, and then some more improvements to the boards made it even better, and it really helped my experience. Now we're still facing the issue of ice time here. We can't really run a proficient team on 3 weeks of ice time. It's not possible. If we had to run most of our practices either in a gym or on someone else's ice, but the drive was just so hard for us to make. So I think that from the past, it's shown that improvements to our facilities really did help build the interest and build our skills, made us love the sport even more. And now we're at that point that our team is more than just introducing us. We are actually a competitive team. It's more than a hobby for us. So we need the resources that can support us. And I know I have friends over at at my school over at Sangre who said, "Oh, can I come out and skate sometime?" "Yeah." "Well, can I come watch one of your games here?" "Yeah." Sadly, they were planning to do it the last weekend of January. We lost our ice. We couldn't do that. Bummed me out, bummed them out too. But the point from this is hockey, it's more than just a hobby for the players. Now it's grown and developed into part of the community, not just for the city, but for the whole valley. So we just need the resources to help sustain this growth and accommodate for the team, the city, and the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Next up, we have Donna Weehee. Donna, thank you for being here.
So Donna Weehee, 211 Levita. We have a son who plays on the hockey team, but I just want to thank and point out all the volunteers and the coaches and the great turnout that we have tonight, because they represent a group of people that are really passionate about this. What we see when we travel around the state, Nederland, Fraser, just recently in Gunnison, we see potential that we could be just like that, where the proximity of where Alamosa is between Pueblo, Taos, Santa Fe, Durango, Pagosa Springs, we really feel like we could attract tournaments here and groups here if we had a better facility to host in. And we want to thank the city and especially Rob Pickett for all the support so far to give these kids as much experience as they've had a chance to have. So it's been good, but we think we can be better. In Gunnison, the town that's smaller in population than Alamosa, has over 500 adults playing. In Telluride, friends that we know that used to live here that moved over there play on adult leagues. It's not just for kids. It's not just for 3 weeks or 5 weeks or 3 months. It's a year-round multi-use facility that I think the city could really benefit from. In Telluride, they use theirs for concerts. And we've talked about roller derby and other types of things that, you know, that they do in Durango with their facility. So I want to thank especially Paul Duarte for all the hard work on the committee that they serve on, and the board members for keeping this little group together, because we've had a great experience. And so we appreciate the support of the city. Thanks.
Thank you, Donna. Next up, we have Caleb Helcom. Thank you for being here, Caleb. Give us your name and your address for the record, please.
My name is Caleb Holcomb, 4140 Road 112 South. I'm here today to talk about the facility, multi-facility ice rink, or added on to that, tennis courts, roller rinks. It could be a bunch of stuff. As a student of a 1A school, I know that there are a lot of students that would like to participate in more sports than just the 5 that the school provides. And this multi-facility sports complex could give them that opportunity to give them what they want. It's not their choice that they are attending the school. It could be the parents' decision. And it would just mean a lot to them to see that they can do what they want. Also, again, talking about our hockey teams, we had a very short season, which was unfortunate. And thanks to our coach, we were working hard at the rec center. He was making sure that we weren't going to give up easy, and it meant a lot to the whole team, boosting our morale, really making us feel like we could be more than just the team with the crappy little rink. We could go far in tournaments and in state. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. And lastly, we have Andrew Novotny. Thank you for being here, Andrew. Give us your name and your address for the record, please.
My name's Andrew Novotny. I live at 101 Willow Creek Place. I really like hockey, and it's a great sport to play. It's just a lot of fun, and we did quite well this year, better than any other year, and we did great even though we only had 3 weeks of ice. And we could be a lot better if we had more ice time and just time to do more things. I also really like rollerblading because rollerblading is fun. It's sort of like hockey, and I really like ice, and that's all.
Thank you, Andrew. And thanks to all of those that were here for that audience comments. We will be discussing this under Parks and Rec under regular business this evening. So please stay tuned for that. Next up are ceremonial items, which we have none of. And we'll move on to consent calendar A. The consent calendar allows multiple actions with one motion. Consent calendar A contains routine items which have been recommended for action by staff or advisory boards. Council may remove a consent calendar item for separate consideration. Tonight, we have the Caton Historical Site designation, approve the minutes of the regular meeting March 4, 2015, accept Colorado Tree Coalition grant, receive February 2015 expenditure report, and receive February 2015 monthly reports. Council?
Mr. Mayor, if there's no questions, I move that we approve consent calendar A as presented.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on consent calendar A? Seeing none, start voting, please. Sharon?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move on to regular business, Parks and Recreation. And we will have the council discussion and direction following ice rink multi-use facility presentation. Thank you, Mr. Duarte, for being here.
Thank you.
As Paul sets up, I'll just give a little bit of a explanation. We had a team working together to try to evaluate what we think from a community perspective and a user perspective would be the most appropriate type of facility, and Paul will review that information. I also just wanted to quickly share, I know we've had some discussions occurring in the community on what we mean by a multi-use facility and some of the information that's being shared regarding that. We do have partners in the community that are working on a potential event center. They might call it something else, but essentially a facility to host conferences or events and those types of activities. We just wanted to make sure that we're clear that these two types of facilities would probably be very different. There might be a small amount of overlap, but for the most part, they'd be very different facilities and in no way are meaning to compete with the efforts of our partner groups in the community. So with that, Paul, I'll let you get into the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. I think, as many folks eloquently stated, you know, there's a lot of information already out there and where we're at. So we'll kind of expand on that. I have a couple packets for all folks up there. And yep, you can go ahead and hand that out now. What those are letters of support from folks in our community and from folks outside of our community, from the Colorado Amateur Hockey Association Vice President. There's also some information from the Tause's Parks and Rec Director, and he kind of talks about how their facility has changed things in their community and how it's made some impacts. Just for a quick idea on that one, last year the Taus rink brought in over $1 million in revenue just in hockey tournaments. And so they're very good at doing tournaments to this point. They've been doing it for a long time, but they're doing that on one sheet of ice, and that's something that we could, you know, eventually work up to. And it's going to take some time to get there, but this is the exact type of facility that we'd be looking at talking about. So the PowerPoint, we'll go ahead and go through that. Again, we're looking at this a multi-use facility, but yes, it's an ice rink. It's an ice rink for 5 months out of the year. Other than that, then it's 17,000 square feet of usable space. So as long as my computer moves here, we'll be all right. All right, so Carroll Park Ice Rink, it was established in 1995, and it was established as a pond. There was a pond out there that some folks finally got brave enough to get out on and skate. So we've made some very good progress up to this point, and we definitely don't want to deny that. We've made some good steps up to this point. In your packets that council received earlier, there's a history of the Carroll Rink Ice Rink, excuse me. And like I said, in 1995, when the pond was open for skating, 97, 98, Public Works Engineering kind of did a survey and a design and site plan to see what the options were and how they could proceed from there. And that's kind of what really got the ball rolling there. In 2000, the Los Alamos boards were installed, and there was a ribbon cutting ceremony that took place at that point. In 2006, a Daniels grant was awarded for ice rink improvements and setting up the youth hockey program. So that started with some equipment for the program, and then it also included lights and some lighting and fencing at the ice rink. Along with that, about 3 years later, in 2009, a warming hut was installed, 400 square feet, and there was an upgrade in some boards, some other used boards out there. We then finally, in 2012, a Zamboni was purchased, and again, that was purchased with Daniels funds as a large portion of it, and then the city and SLV Youth Hockey Association included some funds for that also. There was also some upgrades with the Zamboni storage hut, the concrete pad, and some water supply into the unit at that point. In 2013, a scoreboard was purchased for about $8,000. That was done with 3 service clubs, and we'll mention those here in a little bit. 90% was paid for by them, and then the remaining 10% was San Luis Valley Youth Hockey Association and the city. The city also did some dirt work around the north end of the rink to try and improve some of the drainage issues that were going on there. And then recently this year, a new changing shed was donated to the city by the Swifts, and that was added into the mix out there. And so we try to capture as many of the improvements that have been made out there and acknowledge those because those are really important. So currently, when we're talking users out there, our users are vast. They go everywhere from small kids to folks that are getting up there in age, but there's everything in between that's out there. And so we have a lot of pleasure skaters, a lot of some figure skaters that have kind of started coming out of the woodwork and showing up out there. And then we also have our hockey programs. We have the recreation program, the rec program, which is in place right now. We also have the San Luis Valley Youth Hockey Association, which a bunch of those folks are here talking about how they're utilizing the facility. As you can imagine, when there's a lot of folks out there with our 400 square foot changing room, it gets pretty exciting. And I think smell is another thing that comes to mind when you think about those kinds of facilities. It's like any locker room. It gets pretty interesting in there, and during changeovers from one game to the next, it's always interesting. Thanks to the Swifts this year, we added another building about half the size of this one that alleviated a little bit of that pressure, but we still have some room issues out there. So what we did as a committee is we really wanted to give you an idea of the amount of use that's going on out at the rink, but we also wanted to make sure that we were very conservative with our numbers because there's not a great way to count out there. And so city staff had their folks that were working out there take an hourly count. And so they took their hourly count, and we tried to derive some numbers off of that. Some of the things that we did is we know people are there for multiple hours sometimes. So we took those folks and we took the numbers and we cut it in half just to try and account for those folks that are out there. And they figured most folks are out there about 2 hours. There's a few, especially in this group, that are out there longer than that, but we wanted to be as conservative as we could with numbers to paint a good picture for you. So currently out at the ice rink, it's open for public use 25 hours during the week. And so that's just to give you an idea of what we're looking at for folks. And so on a normal average weekday, there's approximately 20 people using the ice rink. On a weekend for an hour, there's about 40. And so on an average weekend day, we're looking right about 100 folks kind of out there. And so what we've also done is including all the folks out there and with hockey, pleasure skaters, all those types of things. We're looking in a 13-hour average weekend, 260 folks are utilizing the ice rink, and that's folks actually skating. And and again, we took that number as half of what they actually counted out there, just because we wanted to make sure we were giving you the most legitimate numbers that we could. So we also, just for comparison's sakes, threw the rec center numbers up there for a given weekend or for a given same time in January, and that just gives you a comparison on average weekend. I think one of the important things to remember when you're looking at those numbers is that the rec center, every time somebody comes in the door, they're counted. And so they may be parents just watching, and they may be athletes, or they may be people using the equipment, but the ice rink ones are just people on the ice. And so those are actual users every single time. And so that's just some information on where we're at. And what we'll do here in a little bit is we'll show you what we believe the projections for use could be with an increase, with the new facility, and how we would get there. So again, here are some of the improvements that have been made. And also the thing that I'd like to point out is these improvements would be moved from the current facility to a new facility if that's the decision you make to go with. That way we're honoring those grants and dollars that were already put into the facility, and we utilize them again, and we make sure that those folks know that we appreciate everything that they've done with that. So again, 2006 were the lights, 2012 was the Zamboni. The grass will be that green here again soon sometime. And then in 2013, the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary, and Optimus Club, the city, and San Luis Valley Youth Hockey Association went in and purchased the new scoreboard. And then in 2015, this is the shed that the Swifts donated. City crews went in, fixed it up, put some benches and all those types of things in there. So those things could all be moved over to the new facility. The shed may be used for something different, but for sure the scoreboard, the lights, the Zamboni, those types of things would definitely be repurposed at the new facility. So currently, why do we need to leave the current ice rink? There's some current challenges out there, and you're all aware of those. One of the biggest ones is it's 100% weather dependent. Without a compressor system, a chiller, we're waiting for cold temperatures to make ice. And it's a very full-time job that 3 or 4 folks in this room have been very intimate with, and it takes a lot of work to get there. And, wow, that wasn't supposed to happen. So just in case you didn't see yourself in a picture, we'll go through them again. As I was saying, we're 100% dependent on the weather there. One of the other challenges is the grounds out there. The boards are on a foundation, and those keep the boards in place, but the rest of it's dirt. And so no matter how much the city tries, and they've done a valiant effort of trying to level this out, once we start getting some freezing down in the ground, we start getting heaving, and there's things going on, and it makes it extremely difficult to get the ice level. Another thing with the grounds that you can look at the boards here is these boards, when we take the shade cloths down, are exposed to the sun all summer long. And so that in turn really rots out the boards a lot quicker than if they were covered all year long. Just an example, Rob spoke with the Taos folks today. The boards that they currently have in their facility have been there for 16 years. They replace, usually it's a stray Zamboni driver that will maybe poke a hole in a panel or something like that, and they'll have to replace something like that. But those boards are in great shape, and anybody that's been there would attest to they don't look like they have 16 years of use on them for sure. And then they replace a little bit of glass every couple of years. He said normally 2 or 3 panels a year would get replaced as far as that. But just to give you an idea on boards, where these used boards, we're really fighting with them at this point. So again, here's just another picture of the grounds. The grounds are extremely uneven out there, and ultimately kind of a safety concern at times. I mean, we have folks walking around in either mud, ice, or snow, and the grounds aren't level. There's some elevation changes in places, and it just makes it really difficult for not only the skaters, but for fans to be around the facility watching what's going on. Also, what happens here is since there's so much dirt that skaters or folks going onto the ice, if they track dirt and rocks onto the ice, then our Zamboni comes on, and it's going to lessen the life of that Zamboni, because it's going to be picking up imperfections and really ruining some of those parts. So another challenge, just due to weather, is warm days. When we have warm days out there, the ice really takes a beating, and anything that's in the direct sunlight really gets soft and has issues. And you can see in this photo where in between the shade cloths, you start to get some soft ice, and it starts to melt, and it creates an issue, and we can't have folks on the ice during those times. Just another photo. This is the north end of the rink, and so you get a lot of that sun that shines through, and it really beats off that north end of the rink, and it really magnifies the amount of melting that's going on that side of the ice. And then also wind or breezy days, and everybody knows, we get a little breeze going through in the winter, it cuts the snow and melts the ice. Does the exact same thing out here. And so with the proposed facility that we'd be looking at, this would give us the ability to have less wind on the ice, and it would also kind of break some of the wind chill that might be going on those colder days. And that's kind of a problem too, because this is a beautiful sheet of ice right there, and those days where we have a little bit of breeze and a cool day, that wind chill gets down there, and just for safety reasons, we really can't have folks out on the ice. And so a facility that's going to dampen the wind would make a big difference out there. So what is the recommendation that we're making to you? So what we're recommending is a covered multi-use pavilion rink. And I got a few pictures here and what that would look like, but ultimately, what would this do for the city is kind of an important question. And I think, there's some key things. One is we feel like it would improve safety. Safety out at the rink, but because of the condition of the boards, the use of chain link around the boards in a lot of places, and then the grounds itself, we feel like this would have an opportunity to improve the safety. We would increase our user groups. We would be able to expand what we can for our winter user groups, but then we would also be able to attract some summer, year-round user groups. Again, we'd lengthen our winter use. And the way that we would lengthen the winter use for ice is through the addition of a compressor with piping in the concrete, and that would allow the ice to be, good up to, easily 50 degrees ambient temperature. Taos, who's, sorry we keep talking about Taos, but they currently run their program from November 1 to the end of March. And if anything, they're a little bit warmer than we are. And so that just gives us an example of what we'd be able to expect down here. And then also, this could have an extremely positive impact on the community. Yes, there are some operating costs that go along with this facility of this type, but we feel that there also is some opportunities to have a positive economic impact. So here's an example of what we feel would be appropriate for here. This is a two-walled facility. So it has a roof, a wall on the south and on the west end. This would leave the north and the east end open. And for a couple reasons is why we recommend that. One is we can take advantage of our cold temperatures, and that we wouldn't have to run the compressor as much as if the facility was completely closed in. A second really big part of it is we don't have to have an HVAC system in there, which is an extremely expensive thing to do. And then an enclosed facility without the proper ventilation, those types of things, your boards start to take a beating and those kinds of things. So an open facility for that reason is really a benefit. One of the third things that's important is GOCO grants don't fund closed-in facilities. So a facility like this would still be eligible for those types of grants. And this one is in Fraser. So this facility here is the rink that Gunnison had for a very long time and still has. Right next to it is their completely enclosed facility. But this is just to give you an example of, it's this with two walls. I mean, that's the kind of the overview of it. It's really similar to that. This is just a view of inside the ice rink. So inside the boards, which you'd want to leave in place, just because the more you take them down and put them up, the more damage and wear they take. But that's 17,000 square feet of usable space. And so when there's not ice there, you have a 17,000 square foot piece of rental facility for endless recreational activities. We'll get to a list of some of the things that we think you could utilize in there. So this is the outside of the rink. So on the left-hand side there, you can see benches, or excuse me, stands for folks to watch the activities going on in there. Right above it is a nice little radiant heater, which everybody that sits out here and watches hockey appreciates tremendously. And so those would be some of the small amenities that we'd be looking at putting into the rink itself. So just kind of a general rough sketch of what something could look like in this facility is with your ice in place there on the left-hand side. That would be the place for your compressor, which would keep the ice chilled, obviously. There'd be a Zamboni room in there for parking the Zamboni, for it to dump the snow, those types of things. And then we'd envision, players' benches on one side, spectators on the other side. And on this drawing, 4 locker rooms. At a minimum, it's important to have at least 4 so that you can have teams that are on the ice have a locker room, teams that it might be swapping coming out. And then we'd also like to look at the possibility of having a locker room just for girls, because poor Hannah has gotten dressed in the hallway or in the bathroom I don't know how many times. And so she's a trooper, but having a facility that's designated for them would be something that's really important, along with some restrooms in a small place for concession stands, which all could be utilized for stuff other than just hockey, obviously. So where would we put this thing? There's been lots of discussion in previous times about leaving it at the current location or moving it to the rec center. Its current location is not a good location. It's in a hole. And for all the reasons we've talked about in the past, we do not recommend leaving it there or even putting it in the current parking lot. And the reason is we feel moving it over to the rec center, we already have some infrastructure in place that we could build off of. The power is right off the highway, which already runs to the rec center. Parking lot's already in place, and we don't have to invest in those types of things. And it also kind of gives the ability for anybody that's using softball fields, the fairgrounds, to have a place that they can do some other types of events, hosting a dance tied into the fairgrounds and those types of things. And so it just seems like it's the most appropriate place to make it work. It is going to be a 2-sided metal building, so there's some discussion on how's that going to look. There's been lots of buildings that have just the front done with some decorative rock and the appropriate colored metal, and it could look similar to the to the rec center. But the important thing to remember is what we've come up with here. We wanted to keep prices down. So if there was a discussion about wanting to make it look just like the rec center, it would increase the cost obviously a little bit. But it just depends on how far we want to go with that. So, winter user groups. So, we believe that, we attract a bunch of these already, but we feel like we could attract larger numbers of them. We would be able to increase our school user groups. There's folks from out of town here that teach and are administrators at other schools that, have voiced an interest in understanding that a facility like this would really give them the opportunity to maybe have programs that would come there on a regular basis. It's kind of tough right now to schedule a PE class or an extracurricular activity on our rink because you don't always know if we're going to have ice. And if the weather's bad or we're losing ice, we don't have those opportunities. But this would give an opportunity for schools to utilize the space, church groups, those types of things. Again, figure skaters, pleasure skaters, the rec, hockey programs, adults, youth. Tournaments, we believe tournaments are a big thing, and I'll expand on that in a bit. But we have everything from curling to anything you can think about doing on ice. So there's lots of opportunities here. Other potential users. By no means does this list everybody that will ever use it or will all of these use it? These are just things that folks that we think that would want to possibly take part in this. But everything from roller derby to indoor soccer, basketball, lacrosse, volleyball, concerts, weddings, dances, picnics, birthday parties, those kinds of things. We're definitely not going to pull the same group of folks that the convention center is looking at doing, because it's more of an open air facility. And I mean, you can definitely have some types of meetings there. You may not want to have, a formal meeting or something like that in this kind of space, unless you want to look at the mountains and that kind of thing. But it's a different type of facility. And so don't feel like we'd be competing for the same folks out there. Some other potential groups, Alma loves the park and they like doing that out there, but giving them the option on one of those rainy days instead of canceling a concert to move under a cover, that would be something that's out there. Same thing with the farmer's market. It's great having the farmer's market downtown, and that's really where we like to keep it. But those rainy days or windy days that, we can move them out there, it's just an option. Ride the Rockies, all those things that use the park, would probably like to have a place where they can send up their vendors, their mechanics, and that kind of stuff out of the sun and have those kinds of opportunities. ASU, CSU women's hockey team, one of their head coach was at one of our tournaments, and he's always looking for opportunities to take his team to other places to train and to put on camps, those kinds of things. Batting cages, again, Valley White school trips, we could put Kevin on the spot, and the opportunities for them to move folks in there, I mean, something like that we've talked about in the past too. We could utilize them. They could utilize the facility for many different facets. I know you didn't fill out the card. You want to say anything?
In the old ice rink, we used to bring our kids down there for merit trips, and they chose to go there, so that was their choice. And so there was sometimes that wasn't an opportunity because of guys.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity, folks. And then there's countless other groups. I think everybody in here could say, man, we could have this there, or we could do that there. And so I think there's just some options out there for sure.
Well, Paul, I got a question before you move on.
Absolutely.
I don't mean to interrupt your presentation. Have you had an opportunity to speak to any of these people, potential group users?
Yeah, actually, city staff, Andy, I don't believe Andy's
Okay.
here, is he? Andy Rice spoke with most of those folks, a lot of those folks, let me say that said, yeah, they would be interested in utilizing a facility like that. But I don't know that we've gotten any further than that. Okay. But they have all been contacted. We haven't had anybody say, no, we wouldn't really want to use that type of facility. Everybody's been very positive about it.
And the reason I asked the question is because I would have liked to have seen some of these people here tonight. Sure, we're all citizens of the community, but it's more so hockey than Alma, Farmers Market, and some of the stuff. And we've been getting questions from all these other groups saying, well, when are you doing this, and why are you doing this? And,
right.
And this meeting was in the paper, and we try to get it out to everybody, and I was hoping some of those people would show up and show their support or whatever their opinion was. So,
absolutely. And I think the important thing to remember is, first, it's an ice rink. And I mean, that's ultimately one of the discussions that we've had is it is an ice rink, but it then affords those opportunities to those folks to utilize it. And that's why they're potential users. Nobody's come in and said, you build it and we'll schedule 3 months of the year right now. But I feel like given that opportunity and people seeing what it can do, I think we would see an increase in those. But yeah, those folks, Andy did speak with some of them, and they were positive about it, but you're right, they're not here right now to discuss that. So earlier we talked about what we're currently getting as far as use out on the rink. This is what's projected. And ultimately what we did here is we took it from the current 25 hours that it's open to 37 and showed the numbers that would do. So this is really the minimum that it would increase if our user base stayed fairly stagnant with a small increase, but stayed fairly stagnant. And you could see, I mean, just on a given weekend, that those projections with that type of just increased hours would really increase the amount of users out on the ice rink. We project that the hockey programs would continue to grow. If you look at USA Hockey, they continue to see growth in all their programs throughout the country, and it's been a steady climb. There was a few years back where they had a small dip, but really other than that, it's really been just a steady climb. You're not going to see great numbers as it, going up, but you're going to see an increase, and that there's a 25% growth factor shown in that right through there. And again, it's not just hockey use, and that's what the numbers on the bottom kind of dictate is the rec hockey program season is 6 weeks. The rec programs throughout the city are all 6 weeks, and so anything outside of that for hockey base is going to be the traveling teams, those types of things where they can attract some tournaments and those types of things throughout the year. But that just gives you an example of what we've seen, what we project as growths over a 5-month period versus the current 6-week average that we're getting out of it. And you all have that packet and have seen that. And so we wanted to give an example of the economic impact that we foresee and actually have seen. This year, we had 4 teams come in for a 1-night stay. They had planned to come in 2 more times this year for additional tournaments, but due to the ice not being there, we weren't able to do that. But this just gives you an example of, teams consisting of, 11 to 13 folks that came down this year. These are actual numbers that we had. Bringing family and friends, there was 165 people for, really 2 days of hockey that came down in here. There was if you hope they all buy a tank of gas before they leave, they all got rooms and they were all eating, approximately 4 meals a day. We were looking at, there being close to $20,000, $18,000 of direct spending that took place. Indirect spending multiplier, 2.25 was used in this, which I believe is very normal for some of the other things that come into town. We're looking at about a $60,000 direct impact as far as dollars go. As far as sales tax go, we're looking for 2 days of hockey, right around $5,600 just for that small of a tournament. The part that's impressive is, again, if we look at the numbers from Taos, Taos has 1 sheet of ice in a facility like we are proposing to you. The numbers on the right-hand side for the Coyote Classic are the numbers that they provided us for the tournaments, 1 tournament that they have in Taos. It's a 4-day tournament. They have 30 teams that are present for that. They're looking at just local tax revenue of over around $95,000 for that 1 tournament. If you look in the packets that you were provided, there's a letter in there from them that this year the ice rink brought in over $1 million of revenue just through hockey tournaments. And like I said earlier, they're very good at doing tournaments at this point. Could we get there? Yeah, maybe eventually. But this really shows the type of economic impact that could be had. The one on the left-hand side is just a normal benchmark of a smaller tournament, 16 teams, and what you could see as far as an economic impact through a hockey tournament. And again, that's one use of it. There's those multiple opportunities for other things to happen out there. So we did our best to get projected costs. Heinz has talked to multiple people multiple times, making sure that our numbers are as close that we can get to being true. We really, if anything on projected costs, we went higher when in doubt. On projected revenues, we went lower than we thought. And so what we're looking at for a facility like this, which includes all the things that we've mentioned up to this point, is $1.3 million. And that gives us the facility that would be able to support ice for 5 months out of the year and then be used for other things the rest of the year. So Heinz and his staff also worked on an operating budget. And again, the revenue side, we're extremely, extremely careful not to overestimate anything on that. And I feel like that's very low on what we're looking at. And then the expenses, he worked out the best he could. And, right now, we're looking about $57,000 a year deficit to function the ice rink. And through discussions with staff and finance, they feel like this is definitely doable at this point, and they feel comfortable making that type of a commitment to proceed with this. So obviously, when you look at $1.3 million, the idea is we will have to go out and get some grants. That's a given. The numbers that are next to these grants would be what we would ask for, with the understanding that that doesn't always happen. There's lots of competition, and you may get some, you may get none, but this is some of the places that we thought we would be able to go, and we believe there's others out there that we would eventually be able to find. But Daniels Fund, the Energy and Minerals Impact Assistance Fund, El Palmar, GOCO, private donors, we believe would be a big part of this. And the city has already dedicated $48,000 to replacing of boards. And so, you know, that's a chunk that's already been earmarked for that. So all those don't add up to 1.3. That would be the city's place to step up and do whatever they felt fit as far as the lease purchase or how that would proceed. But that's what we'd be looking as far as dollar-wise goes. Timeline to completion. I think it's really important that up to this point, there's been a lot of work done, obviously, to try and pull this all together. And so that kind of shows you what's been done to this point. I feel it's really imperative that if you make the decision to proceed with this, that it's made sooner than later, because what ends up happening is the longer we wait, the less opportunity we have to apply for grants. Some of these grants obviously ask for public input, and so we need to do those. We need to have those taken care of. And then we would have to be right in June, you know, already making those grant applications, sending those applications into GOCO and the different foundations. And so it'd be really important that if we wanted to stay on this current timeline, to make that decision sooner than later. But with this timeline, we would be looking at having ICE, you know, the end of 2016.
And Paul, is that wrapping it up? Because I wanted to share a little bit of the financial perspective.
Yes.
Okay. From the work session, I know we had some discussions in regards to what the city budget looks like and the recreation fund balance and how all of these numbers relate. Paul showed the slide where it showed that the anticipated shortcoming from revenue minus the expenses for operations would be about $57,890. We wanted to remind council that right now we are currently spending about $13,000. So when you're evaluating this project, it's probably more appropriate to look at it from being an additional ongoing cost of around $45,000, $46,000. Now, we want to be clear with that this is something that if we commit to, that would be anticipated to be an ongoing cost and doesn't necessarily go away. The other portion of the project, though, is obviously the upfront capital part of it and how to tackle that. My recommendation to council was based on some of the other looming issues we may have in regards to the levy, water issues that is going to hit the general fund side of it. I would really like to keep this project really on the Parks and Recreation side of it. So when we look at our fund balance, I believe that was a question last time, we are currently under community recreation at about $230,370. Under the Conservation Trust, we have about $67,000, and under cemetery, we have about $122,000. Now, obviously, cemetery and Conservation Trust would not play into this, but when you're thinking Parks and Recreation projects and what's competing for these items, sometimes those funds fund some of those projects. But from the Community Recreation Fund balance, through our budget process this year that was adopted by council, we anticipated that going up about $100,000. That's about $100,000 we anticipate to be ongoing. So when we present this to council from an ongoing perspective, we talked about that amount that the grants don't cover, doing a 5 to 7 year lease purchase. We don't want it to be long-term for this type of facility. We don't want to lock up too much of the funds. So we would look at doing about 5 to 7 years lease purchase, and we would want to tie that into that $100,000 cushion that we're anticipating. So you've got some of the ongoing operational, which will be ongoing, around 45,000. And then you have those that would be 5 to 7 related to the payment for that lease purchase. Amanda has done some research and looking at, what the current rates are, if we do 5 years versus 7 years, those types of things. And, depending on if we do move forward and when we actually do the issuance of this, we could be looking at 500,000 to 600,000 that keeps us easily on the Parks and Recreation side. There's other flexibility in the budget, but from my perspective, my recommendation is to try to stay within the Parks and Recreation until we have the water and the levy issues resolved and have our hands wrapped around those. I think it's safe to stay around that area. Through some conversations, it's something we want to make sure that we're clear that is right now our flexibility. So if there's other projects that come up, it does somewhat limit what we're able to do. Now, 5 to 7 years, about half of that hopefully would be gone when the lease purchase is complete, but it doesn't release all of it. So as council members, as you're considering that, I just wanted to make sure we're clear on what parts are ongoing, what parts would be for the 5 to 7, and then where the fund balance is and where some of the room is coming to be able to accomplish this project.
Thank you, Heather.
Paul, Heather.
I have a question on the finance.
Thank you very much for the information you have on this multi-use, and thank the multi-use committee for their energy and their enthusiasm and the time that they put in giving us this pertinent information and providing council with and the community with the facts necessary in this discussion. Council, you have comments? Rusty?
I do. I have a question on the finance end. If I'm understanding you correctly, so we're going to try to keep it under 100,000 for 5 to 7 years, right?
So that 100,000 is almost split two different ways. One of it's going to be absorbed by the additional 45,000. So that will be ongoing, which leaves 55,000. So we would want that roughly 55,000 to be for the lease purchase, which would then be freed back up in 5 to 7 years.
Okay, so 5 to 7 years at $50-some thousand a year, and we're paying off a $500,000 to $600,000 loan. Those numbers don't calculate to me. Am I missing the question?
I mean, I can have Amanda come up and explain.
So if we're doing a $50,000 or $52,000 or $53,000 payment a year, it would take 10 years to pay off.
The other portion of that is, if you look at the fund balance, it's actually, I think, 108,000. When we were doing this, we actually, after this was completed in the budget, we closed out with more of a savings than we anticipated. So there may be even a little more additional cushion. But staff's recommendation is that payment does not ever get subsidized from the general fund side of it. So by the time, if there is direction to move forward and we do the issuance of the bond, it wouldn't be taking anything from the general fund. It would be covered from the Parks and Recreation.
So it'd be taking additional funds from our reserve to make that payment?
No, what was projected was that 100,000, 108,000 was going to add to the fund balance. What we're saying is we would not be adding to the fund balance.
Well, the question I'm asking is, we're looking at $50,000 to $60,000 for a 5 to 7 year period for a $500,000 to $600,000 loan. Those numbers, it would be 10 to 12 years to pay, is what I'm calculating.
The other area within the Parks and Recreation budget, you might recall last year we had to convert several of our employees that were contractual into full-time. And there was juggling that was going on within the budget. So we anticipate that there might be additional beyond just the $60,000 we can use for the payment.
So there's additional, but it's coming out of Park Rec funding. Thank you.
Councilor Grego?
I had some questions on your presentation, Paul. One of the biggest concerns was the board's replacement. And now that you say that sometimes they even last 16 years, Because the other presentation you gave us was 8 years or 10 years as far as replacing these boards, and they were going to be at, I believe, 350,000? Is that correct or no?
That must have been somebody else's presentation, Charlie.
Well, I've heard about 2 or 3 of them, so you might
there's
be right.
what we've found, and we just recently went and got the information on the time span on life of the boards, and right now it's looking like 20 years isn't out of the normal for boards, just from those discussions that we've had. And there's options as far as used boards and new boards. We've looked at those. Used boards are used boards, and so some facilities replace their boards more often because they have the revenue to do that. You'd still be looking at, $50,000 plus to replace boards if you purchase used ones. What we found for these, for new boards, so if you...
The used ones were 100,000?
And the used ones were 100,000 installed, is what it is. So, and that again, we were on the high side because we wanted to make sure that we weren't telling you something that we couldn't do. But if you go to some of the current rink facilities that sell used stuff, they'll have them anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, depending on their condition, and that we felt like we could get those installed used for $100,000.
And the new ones would be 250?
New ones were 250.
I think that's what...
159, sorry,
I thought we
159.
had applied 250 to GOCO to buy boards.
I don't think it was that much.
Was it? Oh, okay, well...
Heinz would have to speak to that, I don't know.
It's good to know that they last that long, because
Absolutely, I was happy to
I
hear
might
that
have
too.
misunderstood the presentation.
And I
8 to
could
10
have,
years.
yeah, for sure. So, yeah, and that came straight from Taos today, that theirs have been in place for 16 years already, and they're in pretty good shape. I mean, we would be happy to have those boards after 16 years of use, for sure.
Okay. Maybe Heinz wants to add something.
Sure. When we were going for that GOCO grant, it was 159 total installed, brand-new boards, because that was where the 48 were we going to match, and then GOCO was going to pay for the rest for 111,000. Like the new boards, they're pretty much non-organic. I mean, you're looking at aluminum, stainless steel, fiberglass, plexiglass, Lennox, that kind of stuff. The ones that we have right now, and the ones that came in back in 2000, they're organic-based, they're lumber, and being outside, being exposed to the weather, exposed to the sun, I mean, they've deteriorated quite a bit, a lot of dry rot, that type of thing. So with these new boards and being under shade, it should cover, the lifespan should be very long.
Okay, thank you. My second question, Paul, is where you place that building, it's north of the rec building. The distance between both those buildings, would there be a possibility of maybe moving them closer so you would use the rec building as a buffer for the sun, which would eliminate maybe some, I don't know if you would still have to come up with the 2 walls, on that.
The reason, and Heinz may be able to add to this, but if we get any closer to the building right now, we would be affecting the drain that goes from the current parking lot that takes the water around the back of the rec center and takes it into that slough that's in the back there. And so we probably wouldn't want to get any much closer to that. But, it's not real far at this point, but yeah, there's still, it wouldn't afford much sun break from just the building. And from our construction folks, the walls really aren't the expensive part of the building.
Okay, yeah.
It's actually the supports and the span that makes that building expensive, and the walls are actually kind of the inexpensive part of it.
Okay. My third question, 5 months out of the year, do we have kids that are interested that long? Because you got other programs going on where kids want to play, I don't know, during that time they play basketball, wrestling,
Sure.
to keep the interest there for 5 months.
Absolutely.
And,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. That's, I'm thinking to myself, you got all these programs and
Sure.
you got your kids going here, you got your kids going there.
I
Would
think,
the interest be there?
If we ask the group here, how many of these kids that are currently playing hockey during the hockey season played another sport or were doing something other than just hockey? So who wrestled? Who's playing baseball? Who played basketball? So.
So
there-
the possibility's there, see? And this is,
Absolutely.
we're talking about today. In the future, you know, you're gonna have kids that, you know, they might be fired up and play 1-2 months, but then after that, you know, I wanna go play basketball.
Sure.
I wanna one day wrestle state champion or something, you know?
Absolutely. And I think the important thing to look at is most of the American development models for athletes, from the hockey programs, the soccer programs, you know, all the U.S. sanctioned sports, they want their kids to play as many sports as they can. They don't want kids playing one sport all the time. They want kids to be well-versed and be able to have their body adapt to many different things. And so hockey season, rec-wise, will always be short. It's going to be those club sports that would be longer. But I don't think we want to build it just for hockey players.
Sure.
We want to build it for pleasure skaters, for curlers, for people that just want to take their family out, or the school have the opportunity to take a class out there outside of that regular hockey season. So I think it's, hockey is important for it, but I think the big picture is all those other groups that we'd really be able to service too.
And my last comment here is, when we passed this facade ordinance, anytime we put up a metal building, we want people to put some kind of a structure in front of it. And I would advise, you know, if we're asking everybody else, and then for us to go put a metal building up and not put the, maybe some kind of a brick or stucco or something, you know, to make it look, you know, we're already asking the rest, yeah, something like that.
So if you look at this facility was last year. This is the old Ford dealership in Monte Vista. It's currently has a new owner in it, and this is what they did to it. And, you know, that's 5 or 6 panels across the front that are the stucco panels that could be put on the front, and then just some of the rock along the bottom side. This would be something that, you know, I'm obviously not a contractor. Home Depot credit card's kind of tapped out, but this front and then maybe the rocks on the side would be able to dress it up and make it look similar to the rec center. And of course, that'll be an increased cost, but a metal building anymore doesn't really have to look just like a metal building for sure.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Councilor Stefano?
Paul, I have a few questions too. We've heard a lot of talk about the boards. Is there any type of special coating that could be applied to these to make them last longer? Every now and then give them a coat or something?
I think the main thing is what Heinz mentioned earlier, is going away from the organic material and really not having wood, but having the fiberglass and that type of stuff that's on there, and so it doesn't rot. Will they break or you get a puck in them? That's really not going to impact them as much as a Zamboni driver maybe taking the corner a little wide. And so ultimately, moving to the new type of boards that we would be looking at, I mean, we're really looking at a 20-year lifespan minimum in that type of facility. If we went with wooden boards, they would rot and deteriorate quicker than these. But, you know, the new boards really last a long time, for sure.
And my second question is, during the off-season of the ice, how would you protect these boards? Are you talking about leaving them in place year-round?
It's
And
recommended.
How would you protect them?
Yeah, it's recommended by the manufacturers to leave them in place if you can, because the more you take them down and put them up, the more times you're going to have issues with them. Really can't foresee anything that would be done in there that could damage the boards more than hockey could, to be honest. If you're having a barbecue or concert or dance, really don't see anything that would make a big impact on the boards. They're pretty firm. I mean, when you think about a hockey puck, when it's frozen hitting them, that's pretty impactful on a very small square inch kind of deal. And so it'd be really difficult to see a big impact on them. And so I wouldn't see having to protect them. Taos also said that they are using their facility for a whole bunch of stuff, and they really haven't had any board issues. They've replaced a couple pieces of plexiglass a year, but it takes them about 2 days after the season's done to get them cleaned up and get all the puck scuffs off of them and those types of things. But really don't do anything other than that. They spend a little extra time cleaning the concrete during the off-season. They'll have an industrial walk-behind floor cleaner just to keep the concrete in good shape, but other than that, they really don't do anything other than that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we discussed having fencing in regards to this project, so access would be somewhat limited. So other than the use, the only other threat would be potential vandalism to the boards. That's the only other item I could potentially think of.
And my question number 3, since our kids are eating machines, are we going to have any type of concessions to feed them? And do you propose having maybe a kitchen or anything like that?
Currently, the kitchen wasn't discussed, but we definitely, in this slide here, on the bottom quarter there, that was to be a concession stand. And that could be run by the city when the city has their programs going, or when you rent the facility, it could be rented, you know, it could be an additional portion of renting that and gaining some revenue to have a place to do that. So it wouldn't be like a full-service kitchen by any means, but it'd have the ability to do some concessions out of it for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Gillespie?
Yes, Paul. What is the deadline? I think you spoke of June 3rd as for submission of grants. Is that all of them, or is that the first one? Or?
That's currently the ones that we're aware of. And obviously, we want to make every effort to get every grant that we could get out there. But as far as GOCO, which would be probably the largest one that we would be looking at, that's the timeline we would be having to get there. And so with that, we would actually have to do public meetings. I believe they asked for 2. And so April, May would be when we would have to have those. And then June, submitting that grant after you've approved what we would be looking for and those types of things. And so for the largest one, it's just around the corner.
Okay, that's what I'd like to see, is a little more time for council to discuss it and possibly even take it to the retreat. Thank you.
Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Paul, a couple questions. I think you have been brought up to date on some of this stuff. With the weather, right now that's kind of your biggest issue. With this facility, can we operate in any weather?
What the manufacturers of the type of compressor that we're looking at, they say an ambient air temperature of 50 degrees is no problem to have ice. And so that's a constant 50 degrees that they're looking at. Will we have those days that we hit that? Yeah. Should that be a big impact? We do not believe so. I can't tell you by 100%, but we believe with the open facility and taking advantage of our cool nighttime temperatures and the compressor, that we shouldn't have an issue keeping ice that long. Taos does it, and they do it, like I said, they're normally a little warmer than we are, and they're going from November 1 till the end of March and haven't missed a beat with that.
And with your current facility, you mentioned in your last presentation that you have issues with too cold of weather. Will this take care of that issue?
You know, what this would take care of mostly on that, Rusty, is it's not going to have the wind chill effect that we currently have out there. So, you know, those days of going out and skating when it's 5 and 10 have been okay. But as soon as we get any wind in there and we get that wind chill, then it's not safe. But if we have those walls in place, we wouldn't have the direct impact of the wind on where folks would be utilizing it.
Okay. And my last question, you know, a big part of the presentation was based on school use and during the day. Have we approached school districts about partnering with some of that?
As far as partnering and costs, no.
Okay.
We have not approached anybody on costs. We felt that it was important to get the city to make their decision first.
That makes sense. Real quick, I don't think anyone's against, I think it's a great facility. I think it'll serve great, the whole thing. My concerns are, I have 2 concerns. One of them is committing to $58,000 or $45,000 a year for eternity, you know, saddling our taxpayers with that. And is that something that they're in favor of? I don't know at this point. You know, I got the presentation, the same presentation 2 weeks ago. I haven't been able to get the feedback, I guess, from, you know, I get good feedback from this group, and that's great. An interested group, I'm going to get great feedback. But from the rest of the community, they're footing the bill too. I have some concerns there. I have some concerns with the initial cost, you know, as I should be. That's my job. Also, you know, the facade, and that's not a discussion with you guys. That's a discussion with council as far as, you know, we've criticized other buildings coming to us without the facade, without a good-looking building. We took great effort to make the rec center look attractive, and I don't think this is your issue. I think this is our issue, and maybe we need to look for, if we decide to do this, it's something that we need to make sure we fund, because I don't want to put a metal building next to our nice.
I agree completely, and I think, you know, with mainly doing that one short wall, I mean, I think you could do some really nice things, you know, at a fairly reasonable price, and then just a short run down the side that would be between the rink and the rec center, which wouldn't be seen, you know, other than the corner a bit. So I agree. I think if we could make it look not like a metal building, that's always a benefit for sure, for sure. And as far as you haven't heard from folks, is this committee didn't go out and solicit any folks to come, you know, knock on your doors and ask you, out of respect of letting you hear the proposal prior to that.
No, and that's not your job, that's our job, and I think Ruth will get something in the paper, and then I think we'll start getting some feedback. And that's just the financial piece is extremely extremely important, and, you know, the crunch it's going to put on the rest of our programs, or the potential if we have things that happen like with the golf course this past year, we may not have the ability to help them out. So, and plus the numbers, I've had 2 weeks to look at the numbers, and I've softened quite a bit. Just the numbers keep changing for me. So somewhere along the line, I was hearing 8 to 10 years for brand new boards, and so I was thinking 3 or 4 years, and I'm thinking 200,000 to 300,000 for boards every 8 to 10 years. We got to factor that cost in, and now it's different. So I still haven't been able to calculate.
As far as the boards go, today's the first time that we've gotten that information on the longevity, on the length of time that those would last, and so.
And I think where that came from is I asked the question, and I think it was a shot from the hip answer, and then I'll bring you back. I'll bring you back more information, and so it could be based on that. So that was cleared up, and that's a real good thing. But that's my issues, and until I work through the financial piece in my head and get that wrapped up, I don't know if I can commit our taxpayers to that.
And I think
Thank
this
you.
is the appropriate person for that.
Can you go to the budget? So on the facade side of it, we've got some feelers out to get some good numbers on that. We haven't got anything back yet, but for a working number on two sides, it's about 50,000 to do something similar to what the rec center is. Now on the operations budget, we were very, very conservative on the amount of revenue to be generated. One thing that we've come a little bit more versed in is the amount of ice time rental, actually renting out the ice rink to teams. I mean, about $100 an hour is like the going rate anymore. I mean, that has not really been shown in that, so I'm thinking with the $57,000 in deficit is probably worst case scenario. That is probably the worst if we run it like we do now. So the potential of that being reduced, there's pretty high potential for that. I think that's it. Oh, and then I guess that's, on the facade, we're just trying to figure out if we can get some good numbers on that.
Well, with the facade end, I appreciate that greatly, because I think that's real important to me. The ongoing operations, I just, that's a number that can grow. You're saying you're being conservative, but 5 years from now, it could be 60, it could be 70. It's an unknown number. I know you're only doing the best you can do, but those numbers normally don't shrink, they grow. And, I just need to make sure we don't have any hidden costs, anything that's going to come around the back door and bite us that we didn't see right away. And I just need to get a good handle on the financial end of this.
And I guess, Rusty, the thing that I would ask that you also keep in mind in that is the possibility for the economic impact that we could see through some tournaments and those types of things. You know, I really, with our current facility, being able to attract people here is pretty amazing if you think about it. I mean, we're kind of, you know, on a shoestring on what we're going with there. And when we're actually able to bring teams in that are traveling from, you know, north of Denver to come and play here, and actually coming from Taos, you know, out of state, which isn't too far, but coming from a really nice facility to play here, I think that speaks volumes to what the programs have done to attract people. And with the new facility, I think the ability to draw more teams more often is going to be a really big player in it too. And so I hope that we don't lose track that there is a possible real positive impact on the economy.
And I can appreciate the impression that maybe, you know, the numbers and if they're moving or not. I think from a staff perspective, you know, what shows up in what was the budget and council approved it then, you know, we anticipated about 108. But then as the final costs come in, we close out the year, we see, you know, if there's more movement and more possibilities within that budget. So overall, my recommendation to council is, you know, if there is support for this, recognizing that we would be eating whatever that amount is, and some of it would be ongoing, and then some of it would end after the 5 to 7 years, and it would really tighten on the flexibility. But whatever that amount is once we get the final numbers and we can get if it's 4.5% for financing or 5% or whatever those are, but the focus, the philosophy behind it is that it stays on the Parks and Recreation tax side of it and not eke over into the general fund. And that's where I would just recommend to see how comfortable you are with it being that tight and not, and focus on that.
Councilor Coleman?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for coming out in support tonight. I really appreciate it. Paul, can you talk a little bit about the current safety conditions of the current facility and what dangers are out there for the kids?
Sure. I think, you know, the main ones out there for the kids that are, or any of the users that are on the ice, is the deteriorating boards. No matter how much city staff sends folks out and tries to get screws to stay in and get edges to meet up, those boards, being organic, continue to decompose and fall apart. And so screws don't stay in. The studs that they're going into are getting worn out, and so they can't really get it in there. And so the possibility for somebody, you know, skating along a board and getting, you know, hooked on a screw right now is really high. I mean, that could happen at any point. With the current way the foundation is in the dirt, which, you know, wasn't really set up to be a good place because of all the heaving that goes on there, you get some unevenness where the boards connect and those types of things. And so, you know, you don't have smooth edges in a lot of places, and so that's really an issue out there. Another really, you know, hazardous area out there is for the spectators. You know, we have folks walking on uneven ground, going to benches that get snowed on or ice up, which wouldn't happen inside a new facility, and we're having people, you know, stand and sit on those metal benches that are as slick as the ice is out there too. I mean, it's just really difficult. Some of the other concerns that I have, you know, from a safe sport environment for the kids is, you know, we have males and females changing in the same locker rooms. Our bathroom facilities are a porta potty that's right in the middle of, to get into the locker room, you have to pass the porta potty to get to it. And so it's, you know, the city has done what they can out there to make it feasible, but it's just not the right place to do it, and it makes it really difficult. Sometimes the groups will bring a concession trailer out there. They plug it into the electricity, and it just doesn't have, you know, the appropriate amount of capacity to support that. I mean, so they're kicking breakers and those kinds of things. But it's just a lot of little things that, you know, kind of the Swiss cheese model kind of lining up for something bad to happen out there.
And as I listened to Paul talk, what brings to my mind is I really do believe as a city we're at a crossroads, and you listen to the things he's listing, and you can think about what repairs can be made and what can fix it. But I think the crossroads we're at is, you know, how much do we want to continue to invest in this facility knowing that without a cover and without a chiller, it's going to range on how much use we get out, and is that meeting the demand that the community has? And that's part of the question versus do we need to create a facility that will better meet that demand, not be as impacted by the temperature and the weather and those types of things. And it's just a matter, I think, of trying to get your hands around what you think the facility is and if it's serving the needs or not. And that's a tough question. But there's solutions to everything, Paul said. We were applying for the GoCo for the dasher boards. And so when you look at some of these solutions, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we know it's in a location where the dirt is what it is, and there's no cover. And again, so it's how much do you want to invest with those, or how much do you want to have a facility that works?
Okay, thank you, Heather, and thank you, Paul. Today I was reading our mission statement, and a part of the mission statement says, and this is the Alamosa City mission statement, it says, we strive to provide balanced business, employment, recreational, and residential opportunities. I think that this project falls within our mission, and I think, unlike a couple council members, that we shouldn't delay because of the potential closed windows of opportunity for grant funding for this project. This team of the city staff, as well as the community, as well as Paul and his team, they put a lot of time and effort and work into this project. I know we could crunch numbers all day long to try to figure out where the numbers are, but I personally talked to Heather, I personally talked to Hines, and they both told me that this is doable. I'm quite sure they included Amanda when they were doing the numbers as well. So for us to crunch numbers when the numbers have been crunched, I really don't see a need for that delay. So I'm more in favor for us moving forward with supporting the efforts, providing that everyone is in line with what we are proposing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Griego?
I appreciate that, Mr. Coleman. And I also want to echo a couple of remarks that Mr. Johnson made. This is a good project. You know, it's a multi-service purpose, and you have done a great job with your group in presenting it and drawing the clear pictures. Well, what scares me is the fact that, and our city manager mentioned this earlier, you know, we're going to have to buy water. The rules haven't come out yet. So we're going to have to buy some water. We don't know what that's going to cost us. You know, that's one thing. This levy, in order to get this levy certified, we're going to have to come up with some money. That's still an unknown. But the biggest thing that scares me is, and you read it on the paper, that they're going for a sales tax increase for this new courthouse. Okay, we operate off sales tax. So what is that going to do? You know, to take it from 6.99 to 8%. What is that going to do? Is that going to trigger people going over that mountain and spending their money, which means our sales tax is going to be lower? See, those are all unknowns that I'm struggling with. No, the project itself is good, and the interest is good. You know, you see the people. I wish I could have got to see some of the other people from these other groups, but just as Mr. Johnson said, as soon as this hits the paper, I'm sure everybody's going to be getting some phone calls. But, you know, those are the unknowns that scare me, and I appreciate Mr. Coleman saying that move forward in our mission statement and so forth. But those are things that we, as the representatives of the people, the caretakers of the money, we got to be careful with that. You know, to build this, you know, I think it'd be a beautiful addition to our community, and hopefully it would attract people to come here and spend their monies in that. But those unknowns, you know, and I don't know if tonight they want an answer. I'm not ready to do it tonight. I know Mr. Coleman is. I don't know if the rest of the council. You know, I'm still having some problems with it. A lease purchase. You know, personally, a lease purchase of maybe 500,000, where this group would come up with the rest of the grants, which we've done with the senior citizens, the Boys and Girls Club. We've kind of had them, you know, you do your part, the city kind of helps out on the other part. You know, maybe a way that, you know, a discussion like that. But like I said, these unknowns scare me, you know.
And I guess the only, and you can educate me on this, Charlie, but I don't believe any of those projects would come out of the recreation fund. Those are all different
True,
dollars.
that's very true. That's very true. But I'm saying, you know, the people out there are telling us, you know, you're over there building, you're building nice facilities now. Our streets are still torn down, you know. Who's going to take it, to try to make that person understand out there, you know, they think that it's just one big pot of money, okay? And to try to make them understand that, that's a whole different story. And I've tried it, and I've been here 32 years trying to do that. And sometimes it doesn't work, you know, and you're going to hear it, you're going to see it, you know. You know, people think that this is one big pot. It's all divided up. You're exactly right. You know, but even the contingency in the recreation, if this tax goes up and no tax money's coming in, well, guess where that's going to lower. And we're going to put 57,000 that would grow to the future, you know, as that drops. See, we need to look at stuff like that.
And I guess the only part that I could comment on that is, you know, as far as the rec dollars and the rec board and the staff has discussed is, we too have gone in and done the CIP and looked at what projects made sense for recreation. Mm-hmm. And right now, this floats to the top. And it takes into consideration all of the things that would be, that the monies for rec dollars would be utilized for. And so, you know, that's where we're coming from. We're talking about rec dollars and right about what you said, that $500,000, $600,000 lease purchase is what we'd be looking at. But we're not looking at general fund dollars like Heather mentioned. It's all coming from that rec fund, and so it wouldn't have an impact on those types of activities.
The sales tax increase would have an impact.
It could.
Well, look what you're losing.
I've heard all the concerns about the financial end of this, but I also believe that our children need facilities to spend their time at. We don't want to, you know, there's a lot of drugs going on in the city. We want to keep our children away from that situation as much as possible. And I think this would really be a solution for the kids. Our children really count a lot in this community. They have a future. And I believe that money is not everything. We have to sacrifice a lot of things sometimes for the safety of the community. And I think this is a great opportunity for the children to have something to do, to get off the streets. I mean, to me, it's an answer to a lot of problems that we have in our city right now, especially with the drug situation. So I'm 100% for this thing. Thank you.
Councilor Vihil.
Mr. Johnson, you want to go?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the hockey group coming here tonight and the fervor you have behind your ideas and such. And some of our council members have talked about the children and that type of stuff. And yes, it is for our children. It's a safety issue. What we have now, and this is no slam on Hines or his staff, they've done their best, but what we have out there is not good enough. It's not good enough. And it's not just for the hockey team, right? We have people coming in here who want to recreational skate, and I just keep thinking about the summertime, what we can do in the fall out there. And it won't tap into groups who will use the Knights of Columbus or all these other little halls around town because they're two different markets. And as Heather mentioned earlier, that the crossover might be very slim. So I am 100% for this as well. Thank you.
Councilor Johnson.
One more thing. Thanks for coming, Paul. Great
Absolutely.
presentation. And thank everybody for coming. And I don't want anyone to get the impression that I'm not for this project. The finances to me still don't make sense when we're talking about $100,000 and a $57,000 a year operating on and on. I don't see how we can keep it under 100,000 paying off 500,000 over 5 years. It just doesn't add up to me. I would like to see how those numbers work. I'm missing something somewhere. So until those numbers look right, and it's not the program, it's not anything, I'm responsible for that money. I need to know how it's working.
Councilor Vihil?
Thank you, Mayor. I would also like to second what Heinz had said earlier, that this operation budget of 57,000 is not going to be that. It's going to be lower. These are very conservative numbers. Okay, they didn't hit the skate time and the renting of the facility and that type of stuff. So I think we as councilors need to understand that 57,000 is going to be lower.
And, you know, from a staff perspective for the next conversation related to this, we'll have a spreadsheet that really clearly lays out the numbers as well. You know, when you just look at the fund balance and what we were anticipating there, that's obviously not capturing the numbers when we were starting to close out the budget. And so I think that could be what's creating some of the confusion. So from a staff perspective, in addition to the conservativeness of the estimates, we can clearly lay out for the next conversation the numbers and how it can make sense.
Councilor Coleman.
And I would just like for council to also look at the big picture of this situation. When they start putting on tournaments, we have an opportunity to recoup some funding through sales tax and taxes that from people who come to these tournaments, and they come in the hundreds, in some cases thousands. We may not get there right now, but eventually we will get to that point. We have to start thinking big. We have to start thinking that we're not going to put a Band-Aid and keep putting a Band-Aid on a trauma situation. We need to build a facility that's something that our community can grow into instead of having something that we continually grow out of. So that's my side on this part.
Thank you, Councilor Coleman, and I'm the last one to speak. And so, you know, when it comes to our community, community needs are paramount in my mind. Safety of the participants as well as the spectators is paramount in my mind. We've got an energized segment of our community sitting in front of us here tonight. And staff has basically supplied us with the wherewithal to get this mission accomplished, in a sense, over a 5-10 year period. I think we need to be brave. I think we can't be afraid of what might happen or that kind of thing, because if we don't get the tiger by the tail, we're not going to see any really important progress in our community. Fiscal accountability, oversight, and grant availability are all things that are playing in here. Multi-use, that is the issue right there. There are so many people in our community that are dying for a multi-use facility. And I know Jamie Greenman's back there, and they're fighting the same battle. They are looking to give the citizens of this community an opportunity in which they can provide a venue for positive interaction. And that's all this is all about. It's positive interaction where our kids can have absolutely something to do other than just ice skating in the wintertime. And so as far as I'm concerned, as the mayor of this community, I am 100% behind this, because I have 100%, I guess I would say, faith in what staff is presenting and what you have presented, as well as the committee for a multi-use program. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And so with that, I think it's up to council to provide some kind of direction for staff. And so, council, what are your wishes?
I wish that we instruct staff to move forward with this project, Mayor.
I second.
It's a.
Is that enough direction for you?
Heather?
Yes, that's what I was covering with Eric, was I'm assuming that would mean one, getting more information to council on some of the questions that were raised tonight, and we can have that on for continued agenda items, but also to start looking at the grants and pulling the information together is how I would interpret that.
I think you have a consensus.
Excuse me, Mayor, I don't mean to interrupt you. Were you going to look at how you're going to set the fund? You talk about the grants. What about the lease purchase? Are you going to set a cap on that, or whatever grants you don't get, that's what you were going to go for as lease purchasing, or what's the direction
So
there?
obviously, my recommendation to council is that we don't cross over into where we are going to require general fund revenues to pay for a lease purchase. That's very dependent on what the tax rate is at that time that we're going to look at it. But we're going to get some projections, so we'll know, we'll get the tighter numbers of how the budget has come in and what we think we have as far as room, and the 45,000 to absorb that. So we're going to tighten all of that up. But my recommendation to council is we only do a lease purchase amount up to the amount that keeps us on the Parks and Recreation side. So the grants would have to come in. Now, obviously, if they work really hard and they're 20,000 away from hitting that, before we return the grants, I'd probably bring it back before council to see if that's what you want. But we're not, my recommendation isn't to go over that and to see how we can do with the grants.
Thank you, Heather. And so with that, we will move on to business brought forward by city staff.
I think you had a motion.
Oh, you needed a motion on that?
I think you had
I
one.
thought you'd,
I think you misunderstood that there was
as far as I said, it said direction, okay. Well, I'll entertain who made a motion?
The motion was just to direct staff to move forward. It wasn't to approve the project or anything like that. And Heather clarified what she assumed that motion to be. But I think that you guys as a council should vote on that.
All right, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
And I will Councilor Coleman had a motion. Was there a second? Michael? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the ice rink facility? See none? Start voting, please. Sharon?
There's nothing on the screen.
Start voting again then. Sharon?
Motion carries unanimously. Oh, I'm sorry. There was 6 that voted yes. Oh,
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button.
That's,
Abstain and it was.
no. Okay.
okay.
6 to 1 then.
6 to 1. All right. Thank you. Next up, we have business brought forward by city staff, city manager legal, resolution number 4, 2015, creating a social media policy and correspondence and recognition policy and modifying the facade improvement grant policy. And so we will move on with that. And we also have discussion on the draft legislation policy and agenda, as well as discussion on the airport. So we will start with resolution number 4-2015. Thank you, Heather.
So this resolution actually addresses 3 different policies. These are items that at the retreat we had some brief discussion on. The first one for the social media policy, we did include an attachment. The city attorney has made some changes to try to make sure we're clearer with what constitutes city business and those types of things. But essentially what prompted this policy is in our efforts to be transparent and to engage the community, we have a lot of tools available to us, and as council members, you have those same tools. And it's just to provide a little bit of recommendation on the do's and don'ts of what to do with the different tools. And so with the ever-changing technology, we'll try to keep that policy up to date. The second policy is the council correspondence and recognition policy. What prompted this is we were getting some requests that fell outside the normal time frame to bring before the entire council to do some recognition, but at the same time, what are the more formal ways that the council wanted to do recognition? So it was just trying to break that down, create enough flexibility that we can appropriately recognize and any efforts on the citizens while making sure you are acting as a group as a whole. The last one is an existing policy. It's the city facade improvement policy. And essentially, staff's recommendation for that is that if the intent of that policy was to generate more investment, it's really not weighing in on people making a decision. So we are recommending to change the levels that's required from a private match. We're still capping it at the cap that it had previously. And our hope is to try to really generate a little bit more interest in doing some facade improvements in the community. And those are the three issues.
Thank you, Heather. Councilor Vigil.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'd just like to speak on the social media policy. Being a younger person and utilizing social media, I'm glad that staff came up with some guidelines and rules for us to follow as a city council person, and then if you were to run as a candidate in the next election, that type of stuff. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I also
Councilor Coleman.
would like to thank staff for the social media policy as well, and making sure that we were able to put that in place, because each one of us have constituents that we reach and communicate in different ways. And I think by having this policy, we'll be able to reach out and inform them more on the things that are going on with the city support. So I really greatly appreciate that, and thanks for all your effort.
Councilor Johnson.
Echo the same thing. The social media, I think, is going to be an evolving thing, and there'll be changes along the lines. But this is it's a good start, and just don't expect this to be it. It'll evolve. There'll be problems, but man, we're on top of it. It looks like a good policy. Also, the facade, for our downtown area, I don't know if this program isn't out there enough, or what's going on with it. Those funds should be used every single year. I wish people would come in and do it. I think with these changes, it's going to help that, and I really appreciate that, running those facade things. I think there's things that could be happening that aren't happening because of the way our policy was. So thanks for that, all the staff, and that's it. Thank you.
Councilor Griego.
Yes, also on the facade, yeah, and I agree with you, Rusty. There's got to be a way to communicate that out there so people can use this. And I don't know if in the facade, do we want to direct them some way? Do we want some kind of a style downtown, or everybody does their own thing? We should have some kind of work session eventually, maybe even with the downtown people, to see if what kind of a facade, what kind of image do we want in our community as people drive through our community, You see this in other communities that, they've got a basic type of design downtown, and that might be stretching it a little too much, but I mean something that would, it stays in your mind as you drive through Alamosa on Main Street, and maybe even now on 6th Street as we start to develop that.
I think those are some great ideas. I think the perfect vehicle so we can ensure that we're getting some input is when we have our outreach for the comprehensive plan update. A lot of times communities will discuss design standards, the look and feel of the community, where they want to go. I think it would tie perfectly into that. There's obviously different ways to achieve that. You can do it through the carrot method, which maybe you attach it to these incentives, or you could do, design standards. So there's different tools to accomplish that. I can tell you we can always probably promote everything more, and that applies to the facade policy. But I can also tell you, there's times I've sat down with people to try to really promote this, knowing some of the needs they have and just the limits that they were going to have to spend on their end of it. It just wasn't matching up with the type of projects they needed to do from a price tag. So I'm hoping this will be more in line with some of those projects, but then also be there where it's encouraging a little bit more of it as well. And we can always promote it more.
Councilor Vihil?
Thank you, Mayor. If there's no further discussion, I'd like to pass Resolution 4-2015, creating a social media policy and correspondence and recognition policy and modifying the facade improvement grant policy.
I second.
I've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on number 4, 2015? Councilor Stefano?
I just had a comment on this. I think it's a great policy, and we've already seen it in operation. I was looking at the Pink Elephant being torn down and the facility across the street managed to get the windows, and they look awesome on that building, so I think it's a good thing.
Thank you. I've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just had one comment, Mayor, in regards to the facade. Councilman Johnson and myself, we attended a chamber event a couple weeks ago or so, and we actually got a chance to talk with someone who took advantage of the facade. I believe it was the Toll House company, and she commented on the ease of filling out the application and getting that taken care of. So I just wanted to commend the staff on making it easy for people to apply and get the funding.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second. Start voting, please. Sharon?
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. And we'll move on to discussion on draft legislation and policy and agenda. Heather?
So we did not set this as a voting item, since this is the first time you're seeing this as a draft. Essentially, if you look at organizations such as the Colorado Municipal League, the National League of Cities, you look at communities that are fairly active on legislative items like Fort Collins, Colorado Springs, communities along the Front Range. What you will see is they usually ahead of time have an agreed upon what they call a legislative agenda. Those are very general categories that essentially lay out how the community feels about different types of legislative items that will come up. Obviously, you can't ever cover 100% what might come up each year, but they're general enough, and a lot of the legislation, probably 80%, usually falls within those different categories. And you have different types of communities. You've got communities like Boulder that are going to have their legislative agenda and what their perspectives are, and communities like Colorado Springs, and they're very different. So it gives you a flavor of the community as well, and where they're aligned. So the legislative agenda that we've attached is still draft. There's a lot of formatting cleanup that needs to occur. There's still some brainstorming that we need to do to make sure we're covering some areas. But it gives you an idea of, for the most part, 80% of it's done, of the different categories where initially we would think the city would fall on wanting to weigh in on legislation. The legislative policy is where we are creating a committee that would be comprised of the mayor, mayor pro tem, and city manager. And how the process would work is that staff would monitor their individual areas. We're also going to tap Michaela to monitor some legislative items as well. We receive correspondence from CML. Sometimes you guys might hear of something. That will kind of be filtered, funneled, weighed in on, information collected, and then that would be presented to the legislative committee to weigh in on with our legislative representatives. If it falls within the agenda, then that committee could just issue the communication and be very quick about it. If it's an item that's not addressed by the agenda, then that's something we would bring before the entire council. So it's just a way to try to create some flexibility to be able to respond quickly to some of the legislative items as they move their way through the system, but also to make sure we're in line with where the city council is on how they feel the community should be run.
Heather, thank you so much for this. And the reason I appreciate this so much is because I'm a member of the policy committee from CML. what this gives me is this gives me a layer of accountability as far as how staff and council is looking at specific legislative issues, and I can go to CML and vote on those. And of course, we can always send letters and things like that. But this is a positive step in becoming more involved in the legislative process. I really appreciate this. Thank you very much for that. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll agree 100% with you. I do think that this is an area that we've been lacking in big time, getting together with our partners in a united front. Sometimes we're not even on the same page, so this gives us the opportunity to unite and give a united front for the ideas we have for our area. So we really appreciate this. I do think this will bring us up to speed where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Do we need a motion or anything, or just this is?
What I'll do is we'll prepare it for your vote at the next council meeting. If you have any questions, edits, comments, just get them to me and I can make sure we include those as appropriate.
Thank you, Heather. Next up, we have a discussion on the county airport. Heather?
There's been a lot of activity, a lot of discussions occurring around the airport. There's been some changes out at the county, and I think with some new eyes, they're looking at things and raising items for discussion. I did meet with their interim manager yesterday, and Pat and I met with him, and there was some information he wanted to share, some ideas that he is having discussions with the commissioners on. They're very, very preliminary. There's a lot of moving pieces, but he was at a point that he wanted to start getting the information on your radar. But prior to having those discussions, with us having some new council members, and some of this dates back to 1946, I believe, or something. So I'm not sure anybody was here during that time on council, not even Mr. Griego. So what we wanted to do is a very quick overview of a little bit of how we got to this point of the county operating the airport, who owns what, and all of those items. And then I'll share with you some of the ideas that the county's currently discussing.
Thank you, Heather. Eric?
So you have a packet that actually we put together quite some time ago when issues concerning the airport first began to be raised. This comes up for discussion off and on. Within this packet is a nice chronology that was put together sometime in the mid-90s, I don't know by whom, that I will just give you the highlights from about what's gone on with airport discussions, library discussions, and sales tax discussions, because the three have been intertwined. So early on, the airport was a municipal airport operated by the city. In 1949, the city and the county entered into an agreement that provided for the city conveying 1/2 of its interest in the airport to the county, and the county agreeing to participate with the city, making it a city and county airport, both half and half responsible for operation of the airport. So after 1949, we've got dual ownership of the airport grounds and facilities. That, those of you who've been on council longer, you remember comes up every year when we have to sign off on the county application for various FAA grant funds and things like that, because the city's a part owner. So that stems back to 1949. Subsequent to that, in 1978, there was a issue to put a 2% sales tax on the ballot that the county took a position on and the city took a different position on, and eventually both parties put questions on the ballot in favor of their own position, and both questions failed. And out of that arose a ballot question for a sales tax that split the sales tax 60-40 between the city and the county, a 2% sales tax, 60-40 between the city and the county in 1978, and that one passed. Subsequent then, I'm going to pull up, Judy Egbert had done a sort of a brief hit on the highlights of this issue. And in 2000, there arose a dispute between, I'm sorry, so the 60-40 split came up in the 90s. The sales tax was earlier. In 2000, there arose a dispute about the sales tax split. The county wanted to change it. There was a dispute about the ambulance emergency medical services funding that eventually actually went to a lawsuit. There was a dispute about funding for the airport and funding appropriately for the library. This all got wrapped up into an agreement, an intergovernmental agreement that was entered into in 2000 between the city and the county that resolved those issues. And it resolved those issues by assigning all responsibility for what had been the joint effort of management of the airport to the county, assigning all responsibility for what had been a joint effort in management of the library to the city, taking off for 3 years the county's desire or stated intent to put an issue before the voters to reallocate that 60-40 sales tax split. So that went away for at least 3 years. Some city payments were made, and that has been the rubric under which we've been operating since 2000. So the county is responsible for operation of the airport. The city is responsible for operation of the library. The city, as you know, as I mentioned, still owns 1/2 of the airport. So that ownership split makes things a little bit complicated for the county in terms of management of the airport. And they have floated before you in the past the question of whether the city would relinquish its remaining half interest in the airport to clean up that management issue. That has never gone anywhere. It gets floated as a bubble, and the bubble bursts, and that has been recently floated again. I don't know to how serious an extent, but the background that gives rise to it every single time is the county does have responsibility for the airport. The city has a hand in management of the airport to the extent that the city is a part owner. So that's sort of the background. There will be, I'm sure, more issues coming up on this because it is, as Heather mentioned, it's been on the county's radar lately in terms of airport operations. You will probably also recall, what was it? Don isn't here, but about a year ago, when we had issues with the airport rescue and firefighting capabilities out at the airport, and the city police or city fire department had to step in and cover those, and is still covering those pursuant to an intergovernmental agreement. So there's a lot of intertwined management that's still going on that is ripe for being cleaned up.
I think the discussions they're having now at the county, and it's, you know, similar discussions that may have occurred in the past, but it's really trying to now, I think, how can they best run the airport in the best manner possible? So one of the thoughts is, should they create an authority? One of the other thoughts that they're talking about is, should the county hire a full-time manager, not kind of split it or have someone do it in addition to, but actually hire a manager and run the airport like it should be run with all the resources the county has behind it to assist in that. As they're working through those questions and kind of weighing that information that they're going to have to weigh, part of what plays into that then is this joint ownership and owning 50% of the land, 50% of the facility. What the question that's been presented to us is if we would be interested in deeding over our portion, our interest to the county. Some initial thought from staff in talking to Mr. Hunt is, clearly within the safety zone where it cannot be developed, there really is no reason for the city to maintain that ownership. It can't be developed. So that's a little bit more straightforward of a question. Those areas, though, outside of that, because the airport property itself is actually fairly extensive, that can be developed. Is there a reason for the city to want to maintain half of its interest in that property? And I think that's a question we could put off until after we have something like the comp plan, to where we can see where we envision growing, where we can see what some of the zoning needs might be. And it could be that it's not going to be anywhere near the airport, or it could be that that's an area that could see some growth. And so I think leaving that for a future discussion, Mr. Hunt thought, could be entirely appropriate. They're more focused on the safety zone itself. The other thing, though, that would, possibly need to be changed is currently right now the other way the city is involved is the IGA clearly states that the airport board authority, or the board, really is what's running that. So they might be looking to change that into more of an advisory board and have the county manager or the airport manager, if they so decide to fill that position, then play more of a operational role in that. So it would be shifting that, and would probably require us to agree to that through an IGA, because that is changing the role that our representative would play in those discussions. Obviously, we could say if we do this, we want to make sure the property's annexed into the city, if we have an interest in that. We could say if we're okay with it becoming an advisory board, we'd still like to have a representative there, because the operations of the airport, the success and failure has a direct impact on us as a community. So there's those types of things. I didn't get a sense that any of that was negative from Mr. Hunt. And again, I can't stress enough how preliminary these discussions are that he is having with his board. They may decide either of these options are not needed, and the way they were doing it was perfectly fine. So I'm not sure what direction they might head in, but he felt he at least wanted to get the information before council, see if there's some initial thoughts, and just be able to keep it as an open conversation.
Thank you, Heather. And so with that, Councilor Grego?
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, being the representative on the airport board, make some comments here. Going back to as far as the city relinquishing our half to the airport, there was also discussion that maybe where the airport, the terminal and the airport lies, there's a strip there that maybe that would be what the city might think of maybe relinquishing. So they would have control of that, and it's drawn out the strip, not the whole property, but just the strip part of it. And so that's been part of the discussion also, that may be something that maybe council would look at instead of relinquishing the whole property to them. Well, it's the terminal.
It's called the safety zone. So it includes the runway, and then I don't know if it's 300 feet on either side. I'd have to look at, but they did send us the information. We have some diagrams we can show at a later time, but it's called the safety zone.
And then to get back to the airport manager, there's been some changes at the county from their administrator and the airport manager, and what we have done. Well, there was a conversation back and forth that who appointed the airport manager, and in these documents it states that it's the airport board that does that. So we finally got that straightened out. There's right now what we've done as an airport board is we've recommended to the commissioners that they put Brittany De Herrera, who's the finance director for the airport, as an interim manager until this project gets done. And during that process, the airport board will meet and find to pick a manager on this. Today we had a meeting because you probably saw on the paper where that it stated that the county had to come up with $90,000 for the terminal, and that the city was going to probably have to pay half of that. Well, I think somebody kind of jumped the gun in front. So what we did is we brought in, we had a meeting today with the county commissioner, Mike, who sits on it and who's been through the whole process with us. We had the county administrator, which the intern administrator, Mr. Hunt. We also had the airport board there. Alcon, the contractor, was there. Javiation, they're the architects that put this together. They were there. So we went through the budget and showed Mr. Hunt, because he was kind of confused on some of the figures, and I should bring a copy of that to our city manager. She could have that on file. But as they went through it and discussed it, and it had been discussed in prior meetings, we are 135,000 below budget on this. So there was some confusion. And finally, we got that corrected. And like I said, Mrs. De Herrera will hopefully operate this more as an authoritative person for signatory to run this airport until we can get it straightened out.
And
So-
I think the meeting also clarified for everyone that the city is not
Yes.
responsible for
Yes.
half of any of the operational costs.
And Mr. Hunt kind of gave me a bunch of these, which I thought maybe the council, when you have time to read all of these intergovernmental agreements that date back to 1949, you know, it's been that way since then, and we'll see which direction we'll go in that, so.
So I guess,
Thank you, Terry.
you know, just from a discussion perspective, if there's any feedback, any thoughts, any questions, anything like that?
Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. The whole property thing is kind of a new concept. I'm just trying to absorb that, but is that any way going to affect our ability? The airport's really important to the city as well as the county, but if we relinquish half of our property, does that eliminate us with any input as to what happens out there if something comes about 10, 15 years from now? Can the county say, we're going to do it this way no matter what you say? I just don't know, and this is preliminary, I know that, but just a thought.
My impression is that in regards to the operations of the airport, our more direct way that we feed into that is through Charlie's role on the airport board. So if we were to modify the IGA to allow that to become more advisory, we would still have a voice, but it would be more of an advisory voice than what it is now. In regards to the joint ownership, you know, the most we can do is prevent and block them from applying for grants or selling the land. How they operate the airport is not necessarily tied to the land unless type of situation. So,
Well, that kind of answers some of what I'm thinking, but
And Mr. Johnson, you're correct. Right now, it's all preliminary, and if we can come up with some kind of a way how to divide that property where they're still able to operate in that safety zone and not have any complications. And there hasn't been complications because
No.
when they apply for grants, they come to us, we sign off on them. I don't think we've never not signed a grant. You know?
I was just mentioning to Heather, I don't think we really need to sign off. They have the authority to operate the airport.
Sure.
But it's nice that they ask us to.
yeah, and I don't think we want to interfere with their
Sure.
ability to get grants.
And in fact, the $1 million grant that they got from DOLA through Mineral Impact, the city put in there that we had contributed over $250-some thousand in the area as part of in-kind, and which helped kind of land that grant too, also.
With part ownership, would that enhance their ability to get grants, just the support letters and stuff like that that the city can supply if they need that extra support?
I think I think it's debatable. I mean, obviously, if we're signing off on it, it's very clear, but you can do support letters and other in-kind without owning it.
Just brainstorming, don't mean to take up a bunch of time, thank you.
I also had an observation. I know that with or through intergovernmental agreements, we can just about do anything. Is there a possibility of entering into an intergovernmental agreement by leasing them the property for 15 years with no encumbrances? That might be an option. I'm not sure. Legal could probably look at that as well. The safety zones, I mean, what interest do we have in that? Seriously. I mean, maybe some of the other properties in and around surrounding safety zones might be to our benefit in the future. I would hate to relinquish that. However, leasing the property through an IGA may not be a totally bad idea and gives them the peace of mind to do what they need to do through our okay. I don't know. I'm like Rusty. I'm just brainstorming here. Absolutely. All right. So, Heather?
I guess think about that. If you have any questions, give me a call or send me an email, and we'll just keep the lines of communication open with the county and provide any feedback that we can.
And really, I think council appreciates the county's position as well. The last thing we want to do is hinder them in any way. And Charlie, I appreciate you being on that board. You bring back a lot of useful information for us.
And I try to get as much information back to the city manager through maybe a reading block that we have that you guys can, instead of making copies for everybody, I think we have a file, don't we? So.
Thank you. And so we'll move on to committee reports. Council. Councilor Vigil.
Thank you, Mayor. I went to the Alamosa School Board meeting. I had to leave early for a minor family emergency, but what I could gather was they honored the basketball teams, the boys and girls, on great seasons. As we all know, the boys made it to state. They honored the wrestling team for their achievements, and they had one state champion as well. They honored the science fair participants in the high school, middle school, and elementary school. There's a freshman, a young man who will be competing at the state level. I don't know his name off the top of my head. And they continue to go through their park testing, which is the state issued tests. This is the time of the year when school districts are allowed to go through those testing, those tests. So they continue to go through that. It's kind of new this year. All tests are online and have to either go through a computer or iPad. So there's some, as everybody is, having some problems with just the technological issues with that type of stuff, but they're getting through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Vigil. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Attended a marketing board meeting on March 12th. It was the fun meeting where they went through grant applications, screened 22 grant applications, and I don't have the final number, but the proposed amount was $63,000 was the grant awards that they proposed. They did some shuffling and shifting. It's extremely interesting that the people that are getting these grants are the same nonprofits that we talk to every year, so they were the familiar faces. Also, the marketing board has two new members, for those of you that didn't know. Kathy Simpson was appointed to that board, and Rob Orendorf was appointed to that board, so they were both present at that meeting. They did approve a loan for financing or to pursue financing for the improvements of the motorway building. I think we talked about this. I'll leave this in the read file if anybody, I thought it already was. They have a conceptual drawing of what they're looking at. They've already started meeting with architects. I think they're in contact with Heather and Pat as far as making sure they're meeting code. Hopefully we have that all lined out. And looks like that project is going to be moving forward, and they anticipate a great building. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Coleman.
Okay, I attended the San Luis Valley Development Resource Group meeting earlier this week, and they're continuing to provide funding for local businesses, not only in Alamosa, but also in the surrounding towns. And this past week, they helped a new business. I really can't go into detail about it, but they really helped a business that was in a tough situation overcome that situation through their revolving loan fund. And they're also trying to improve more county participation in that group. And they elected a new executive board with me being the chairman, Lawrence Pacheco being the treasurer, and TJ being the vice chair as well. So things are going well with that group, and we're looking forward to them doing great things in the valley.
Thank you. Councilor Stefano.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to report that the seniors are happy with the resolution of the building. They're very happy and looking forward to going forward with their endeavors. Also, I want to thank Public Works for the patch they did on the corner of 11th and State. I had a couple of constituents call me about a big old bump by the stop sign, and it was resolved. I went by and it's taken care of. It looks great. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Council. I think one of the neat things about our community is that we're seeing so many improvements all over town. Rusty just talked about the motorways building, and then we look down on 6th Street where the old Pink Elephant used to be, and boy, you'd be surprised how many positive comments I get about, now, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? And so it's exciting. Our community is really moving forward with a lot of neat projects, and, you know, I'm excited about that. I don't have a committee report. I'll just make a council comment early and before staff gets in here. Heather?
I actually just have one update, and unless staff has any others, it might just be the one. Last week, I was able to attend a 2-day training on economic development that focused on marketing. Overwhelmingly, what is really being hit home is if you don't have the right stuff on your website, they're not even looking at you at this point in time. It's the website, the social media, all of the online services has so dramatically changed how economic development is done that you really have to get the tools on there. This is something that Randy's been working on and working on trying to update their website. Additionally, it ties into some of the changes we've been trying to make with our website, and we've actually had an ASU intern working with Pat on identifying what we need to get on our economic development page. And so this was very timely. I was able to come back and almost give her a to-do list of here are some of the items. And so it was overwhelmingly that we need to improve in that area and get more of a presence on the website for economic development.
Thank you, Heather. Do we have any other staff announcements?
Mayor, if I may, I don't mean to put the chief in a position, but I wanted to see, there was a meeting for substance abuse, a community meeting, and I noticed your picture was there. So can you kind of give us a little update of what went on in the meeting? And I had attended the first one, and then this was the second one they had, and I don't know who else was there from the council.
I was
or
there.
the mayor was there.
So was Ty.
Ty, can you give us maybe a little, because there is a big concern about the drug situation in our community, and like I said, I don't know where they're going after this meeting.
The meeting was well attended. If you weren't there, I would say probably about 70 people.
Easy.
At the beginning. They did a SWOT analysis where the community would come up with their ideas of what we could deal with, and then we had a panel that was put together. In the picture you saw, I was on the panel with the sheriff was up there, the chief of Adams State University, community members, a lot of different people, but the community had just questions for the panel members, and really they were talking about the schools more than they were anything concerns about the drugs in the schools, the programs, availability, things like that. There were a couple of questions for me that I answered, but I think the mayor and Ty would agree that they were more concerned with the schools and the programs that they offered about the education and training and prevention, things like that for drugs. So.
I know on the first meeting we had, I had told them that maybe they should come to council and visit with the counselors, you know, as far as the problems, you know. I says, the only time we've seen a big gathering is when they wanted to approve marijuana. I says, I'd rather see a big group coming to council talking about the drug problems we're having, you know. And some of them thought that they would maybe eventually go that, but I invited them to come, you know, so.
Yeah, they made me aware of the meeting, and I told them, well, myself and Captain Anderson were there from our organization, and told them that we were addressing the drug problem, bringing on the new dog, and doing the best that we could. Some of the citizens had feelings that we could just find out who's dealing and just go arrest. And I educated them a little bit about civil rights, and we just can't go kicking indoors when we know that somebody's doing it. We got to have the probable cause and the proof. So maybe a little education that way. But we are working on the drug issues. We're addressing them one by one, as you're seeing in the paper and the updates that we're giving. So we're doing what we can, as much as we can, as quickly as we can.
And Chief, I know, you know, when you get the calls of suspected activity, you guys always appreciate getting those and being able to work with neighbors to follow up and all of that. So, you know, just to encourage that to keep coming, but there is a process that you have to follow.
Correct, and we do encourage those, and I told the group that as well. We also talked about use of Crime Stoppers and how to go through there, remain anonymous, and provide those tips and how that system works. Robert Jackson, Sheriff Jackson, kind of addressed that. He's more familiar with that entire process than I am, so I let him speak about that.
Chief, I was also there, and it was great to see you there. It's an ongoing battle, and you guys need a lot of backup from the community. If the community would stand up and quit being scared about turning some of these dealers in, we'd have a more positive impact. So you guys got a job on your hands, and I admire you for that.
It's an uphill battle, and you know, I did tell the community we can't do it without their involvement. We can't be everywhere all the time, and without the tips, without the communication, without their involvement, we can't do it alone. It's got to be a collaborative effort.
Chief, we appreciate all your efforts and the efforts of your department. We know it's an uphill battle, but we're right in here fighting with you, so if there's anything we can do, please let us know, let Heather know, and we'll just move forward with this issue. I know they're having another meeting, I can't remember when.
I don't remember the date. It's going to be publicized, and there's a couple of these groups around. Tonight, Prescription Drug Task Force was meeting, and unfortunately I couldn't make it because of this, but I did send Captain Anderson. So we're trying to stay more and more involved with these community events and gatherings to speak about the drug abuse and how we can combat it, and instead of an uphill battle, make it a downhill battle.
I think awareness is probably the biggest contributor to making sure that we stifle a lot of the drug activity that's going on. So, you know, it's thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you. I appreciate your support.
Thank you, Chief.
All right. Council comment.
I guess.
Councilor Vihil.
Well, go ahead, Vihil. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a kind of a lighter subject. I wanted to introduce something to you all. A teacher in Center, a science teacher, who's done a lot of work with Science Fair, approached me, and he lives in Alamosa. He is aware of our glass crusher and our expanding recycling program, and he had a great idea, and I approached Pat with this, and Pat was all for it, is that at these science fairs, the San Luis Valley Regional Science Fair, there's a lot of groups, businesses, hospitals, medical companies who offer small rewards for top projects in that field or in that subject. So this teacher had said, hey, what if you next year promote from the city of Alamosa a small, like $25 prize for the top project who does some research on recycling programs, what we could do maybe with crushed glass, that type of stuff. So I thought y'all would maybe like to hear something like that. And what that does is that because all the schools in the valley are participating in this, now students around the valley know know more about recycling, okay? And now their parents know more about it, and it just builds awareness. So I thought y'all would like to hear that.
Thank you. Councilor Griego.
I had a couple, tomorrow morning at 6:30, we're invited to the Boys and Girls Club. This thing starts at 6:30 in the morning. So I was wondering how many people from council were going. Yeah, okay. So I met up with Mrs. Martinez, and she says, well, please invite council and staff, and I know some of our staff, it's kind of difficult at such a short notice, but we'll be there. And then secondly, I had reported to our city manager, we're still having traffic problems on Ross, and I mentioned it to Mr. Stefano, and I wonder if maybe maybe some patrol cars going up in that area, if they're writing a report, maybe they can park in that area or something like that, Chief. I know in the past we've done that, and that kind of curbs it a little bit. But I know you've put that trailer out there and stuff, but it's still a big factor out there. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Councilor Gillespie.
Yes, I just wanted to thank everyone involved in the demolition of the Pink Elephant. That was a good project. It's good to see that it's completed. I never thought I'd be so happy to see a vacant parking lot, but thanks to all the contractors that participated and volunteered and did work on that. That's all I have.
Councilor Stefano.
Mr. Gillespie, Randy Wright deserves a lot of credit, man. He worked hard on that to resolve that issue, and it's great to see it gone, and hopefully to see something new here pretty soon.
Thank you. Councilor Coleman.
And I just have a comment. I just would like to thank the staff for all your effort with the multi-purpose ice rink and all the time and energy that you put into that. And I would like to thank the community at large who came out in support. Appreciate it.
And I would like to thank staff and everybody else in the audience who's here sitting with us, making sure the city is run well. Thank you very much for that. And so with that, I will adjourn this meeting.